Thank you for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Efrem Graham. Straight ahead today.
If a single additional Russian force goes into Ukraine in an aggressive way, as I said, that would trigger a swift, a severe, and a united response from us and from Europe.
America orders its diplomats' families to leave Ukraine with growing concern of a Russian invasion. We're following this story and an historic resolution from the United Nations in its fight against Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism.
We are seeing a wave of anti-Semitism, a wave of Holocaust denial, and I think the fact that the UN General Assembly will adopt a majority resolution is very important.
Then later, a charitable organization launches a one-of-a-kind curriculum on anti-trafficking. See how it's being used in a number of schools across the United States. These stories and more are coming up now.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin this half hour with America's military on the cusp of sending several thousand U.S. troops to Eastern Europe in what is becoming the worst security crisis to emerge between Moscow and the West since the Cold War. As the high-stakes game of diplomacy continues, U.S. forces are standing firm in their commitment to its NATO allies, sending military aid in the event that talks of peace fail. CBN's Brody Carter has more in our top story.
With growing fears that a Russian invasion is imminent, the U.S. State Department is telling the families of U.S. diplomats in Ukraine to leave the country. This as the Biden administration considers sending U.S. forces to NATO countries in Eastern Europe.
If a single additional Russian force goes into Ukraine in an aggressive way, as I said, that would trigger a swift, a severe, and a united response from us.
More than 100,000 Russian troops are believed to be along the Ukraine-Russian border, including in its neighbor, the north, Belarus. The British government now claiming it has intelligence that Russia is plotting to install a pro-Russian leader in Ukraine. The UK says several former Ukrainian politicians have been recruited for the measure. Russia calls it nonsense and disinformation.
It is certainly possible that the diplomacy that Russia is engaged in is simply going through the motions, and it won't affect their ultimate decision about whether to invade or in some other way intervene or not in Ukraine.
As diplomatic talks continue, another shipment of U.S. military aid arrived in Ukraine, including 90 tons of ammunition and anti-tank missiles. NATO countries are also sending military aid. Sunday, lawmakers pushing for stronger sanctions and military aid to deter Putin.
We need to be very aggressive in pushing back against President Putin, whether that's in the form of sanctions, as well as continuing to equip our Ukrainian friends with not only defensive capabilities, but also offensive weapons.
Representative Mike McCall, the top Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, warns that the world is watching the U.S. reaction.
This is not just about Ukraine. It's about China. It's about President Xi and Taiwan. It's about the Ayatollah and the bomb. It's about North Korea that just fired off 2 missiles.
Over the weekend, White House officials said President Biden is considering sending several thousand U.S. troops in addition to warships and aircraft to NATO allies in Eastern Europe. The latest Trafalgar poll shows nearly 85% of Americans believe America should have a limited involvement if Russia invades Ukraine. Brody Carter, CBN News.
A show of force, that in essence is how the military described a recent port call when a powerful U.S. submarine surfaced in Guam, signaling the power, capability, and readiness of the U.S. Navy both to our allies and adversaries alike. But as CBN's national security correspondent Caitlin Burke reports, some experts warn it also exposed our limitations.
When it comes to weapons in the U.S. Navy's arsenal, ballistic missile submarines are some of the most powerful. Considered a part of the nuclear triad, their whereabouts are a closely guarded secret.
The submarine deployment obviously is a very important posture because it deals with deterrence.
Territorial tensions with China are escalating, and the Navy says the presence of the USS Nevada reflected the United States' commitment to our regional allies. Some defense experts argue the current threat deserves a much larger show of force.
But when you think about it, one submarine, one sighting in X number of years, and it's a newsworthy event. That kind of says something in and of itself.
Dakota Wood with the Heritage Institute points to the large-scale military exercises of the Cold War, efforts that showed what the U.S. was capable of if provoked.
It provides some insight into the paucity or the low level and quantity of things that the U.S. military is now able to do because of lack of capacity, and how a single event, an aircraft overflight, a single bomber leaves the United States to fly over a particular country. I don't know that I would be that impressed if I were in Beijing or Moscow.
Miles Yu, a former Chinese policy advisor in the Trump administration, says the stakes in the Indo-Pacific are incredibly high.
For many decades, the United States, and for that matter, much part of the Western alliance, mistakenly believed that Taiwan is perhaps the only piece that China wants to dominate, to take. We now see that Taiwan is but the beginning of a chain of aggression.
Yu says that if Taiwan falls, China will turn its attention to the rest of the region.
If China starts this chain of aggression, China should be made fully aware that it will be further isolated, even completely cut off from the free world.
Yu says that despite the rapid growth of China's military, the U.S. remains the dominant power. Keeping Beijing in check, however, will require leadership from Washington. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Caitlin, thank you. The 49th Annual March for Life kicked off Friday in Washington, D.C. This year's theme was Equality Begins in the Womb. The pro-life rally comes on the heels of the Supreme Court's hearing arguments in the case of Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health. And this ruling could overturn Roe versus Wade and return the issue of abortion back to the states. Special guests from across the U.S. spoke at the rally, including actor Kirk Cameron.
After this day is over, I want us all to remember to continue the marching orders that have been given to us by our Commander-in-Chief, who lives in the heavenly places. And his executive orders trump all other executive orders. And the mandates from heaven remind us to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God.
The president of March for Life told the crowd she is hoping and praying this year will be an historic change for life. The head of the Republican National Committee tells CBN News Democrats don't appear to care about the problems Americans are facing today. CBN's chief political analyst David Brody spoke with Ronna McDaniel, who says while the GOP is poised to take back the House and Senate, there's still a lot of work ahead of them.
If polls are accurate, the Democrat Party will be in for a rude awakening in November's midterm elections. At this point, the crises seem too many to name, although in my interview with RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel, she came with a list.
I mean, David, what hasn't gone wrong for the Democrats? And it's not a joyful thing because the American people are the ones suffering as a result of their failed leadership. Let's look at inflation, our empty grocery store shelves, what our kids suffered through with this pandemic and being out of school, and still schools that are out right now and virtual. And I think the biggest issue is they don't seem to care. They don't seem to understand that Americans are really hurting under their policies and their leadership.
With a Democrat platform embracing abortion at any stage, McDaniel believes Republicans can make inroads on the life issue.
We are very proud to fight for the unborn and actually follow the science.
So what's the best route to victory in the midterms? Although Donald Trump may be toxic to some, McDaniel doesn't shy away from the former president.
Well, there's no question he's incredibly popular in our party. I think his popularity's grown as we've contrasted what he did with his administration policy-wise versus what we're seeing under Biden. And he's going to be a key in the midterms. We're going to need him out.
One outreach, however, is drawing criticism. The new RNC Pride Coalition. Is the RNC okay with the LGBT sexuality agenda? Because, look, conservative Christians say it's damaging the moral underpinnings of our Judeo-Christian culture. They don't think you should do this. I know you've been getting a lot of pushback. I've got to ask you about it. Do you regret that at all?
So it's actually a gay outreach, and it's similar to what the Trump campaign had. And listen, this is what I always say. Because you invite someone to your church doesn't mean you change your doctrine.
McDaniel wants a big tent and will let Republican voters decide who should be representing their party, even if they are more moderate. Are you looking to purge these rhinos within the Republican Party?
I don't know if I like the word purge. I think that's a tough word. I think
Okay.
we let the process play out. We look to represent the voters.
The party also wants to be represented fairly in upcoming presidential debates. They've asked potential contenders to sign a pledge to not participate with the Commission on Presidential Debates due to past controversies. But then what happens? What does that venue potentially look like? Like conservative think tanks, conservative groups? What could
Well, we can
possibly be
negotiate
the case?
directly with networks. We can negotiate with universities and go to the DNC.
But for now, 2022 remains the main focus.
Let's look at what Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are doing to this country. They want to strip away religious freedom. They voted for taxpayer-funded abortions. They are all right with abortions being done on a due date. It is radical, their agenda. They want to strip away the filibuster. They want to stack the Supreme Court, which would upend everything we stand for in this country. So every single day, I'm going to talk about Democrats.
David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
Turning now to the COVID-19 pandemic, there may be signs the Omicron variant is slowing down. Right now, the cases are reducing in more than half of the country, but still critical in other states. In those areas, cases remain high in hospitals. The ICU capacity nationwide is also at its highest level in a year. The U.S. is nearing a pandemic record of 147,000 patients receiving care, with 1,800 people losing their lives to COVID daily. The federal government is urging Americans to get up to date on their vaccination, saying boosters slashed the risk of hospitalizations by 94% for the Delta variant and 82% for Omicron. Coming up, it is a major victory for Israel as a new resolution is proposed from the United Nations. Find out more why this resolution is important coming up next. A major victory for Israel at the United Nations. The General Assembly adopted an historic resolution to combat Holocaust denial and surging anti-Semitism. The United Nations took the action on the anniversary of one of the darkest days in history. Chris Mitchell brings us the story from Jerusalem.
The timely action becomes the first Israeli-sponsored resolution passed by the UN General Assembly in 17 years, and only the second in Israel's history. The resolution, backed by dozens of countries, calls for action to combat Holocaust denial and distortion as anti-Semitism continues to surge globally. A key element calls on social media giants such as Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter to remove any offensive content of this nature from their platforms. Israel's UN ambassador cited a report showing the failure of social media companies in dealing with complaints over anti-Semitic content, including Facebook, which dealt with only 11% of the posts. Former Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, tells CBN News why this resolution is so significant.
Unfortunately, today with social media, we are seeing a wave of anti-Semitism, a wave of Holocaust denial, and I think the fact that the UN General Assembly will adopt a majority resolution saying that all countries should fight Holocaust denial, should educate about the Holocaust, it is very important.
Thursday's vote also came on the 80th anniversary of the Wannsee Conference. That's when the leadership of Nazi Germany decided to implement the final solution, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews.
It's very important, very symbolic that we're passing the resolution actually today, but we have to learn the lesson about the future. When you have radical leaders actually speaking about how they can terminate the Jewish people, we have to take it seriously. So back then it was Nazi Germany, today it's the Iranian regime. When you hear the rhetoric, to the threats coming from Tehran, we should not ignore them. We should face them. We should take all the necessary measures to protect ourselves.
The first Israeli resolution supported by UN members came in 2005, designated January 27th as Holocaust Remembrance Day. Danon emphasized today's generation needs to learn about the Holocaust, especially from those who endured it. This week, CBN News sat down with 98-year-old Holocaust survivor Walter Bingham.
Later this month is going to be International Holocaust Remembrance Day. What's the lesson that people need to take away?
Never again. Just 2 words, never again. The lesson is never again. Unfortunately, people don't learn.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Still ahead, a unique curriculum in some schools that helps students understand sex trafficking and abuse. We'll share more on this and the nonprofit organization piloting the program when we come back. A first-of-its-kind anti-trafficking curriculum is being piloted in schools in several states. It teaches children in K through 12 to understand both sex abuse and trafficking and gives them the tools to report it. The nonprofit organization, the Foundation United, has worked with researchers at Michigan State University and Yale University to develop the program. There's also a one-hour course that families can watch with their teens and use as well in churches. CBN's National Security Affairs correspondent Heather Sells spoke with Elizabeth Fisher about the program.
Elizabeth Fisher Good is the founder of the Foundation United, and she is here now to tell us more about this new curriculum. Elizabeth, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Heather. Excited.
This curriculum is designed for really all ages, K through 12, and it's designed to help children and youth really understand sex abuse and trafficking. How does the curriculum help kids understand these concepts?
Well, what's so unique about it is it's something that has never been done before because it's a systemic train-the-trainer program for the entire school system. So not only are children getting new language, new words, new phrases, ways to look at it, way to talk about it, it's called Speak Up, and that helps them really form what needs to be said, but it actually educates everybody from the superintendent down to the principal, to the lunchroom ladies, to the school bus drivers, the workers, because somebody might notice. Maybe it's just the cafeteria lady that has a relationship with the child, and she now will be trained and has ears to hear what might be different. Susie went home Friday looking one way, and a child comes back on Monday looking completely different. So the children are empowered, the system is empowered, and our very first rollout, we had 4 children come forward just in one grade to share what they had kept inside as secrets. So we're excited because it's intervention rather than waiting for these children to go down a long, dark path.
Right. Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, do you expect that there will be an increase in reporting in these schools that are launching this curriculum?
Yes. I'm actually meeting with one of the state's DCFS departments today just to speak about, different pathways, because here's what we know. Children are groomed to keep secrets. Adults will tell them all kinds of lies to make them believe it's their fault, don't say anything, or it's through social media. We really have an emphasis on the 1 out of 9 children being approached through their iPhone or iPad right in their bedrooms and being able to understand what that is all about. So as things do come forward, yeah, we do see a lot more that's going to be coming forward, but we want to find really good pathways for these children, not to be dragged from bad to worse, being thrown into like a horrific system, but rather getting to a place of true freedom. And that's the goal of the program, things that come up and out, but interventions to find the right pathway.
I want to ask you, there's also a prevention piece in the curriculum. Is it possible in some circumstances for kids to prevent abuse? Obviously, they can't prevent it in every case.
Yeah, well, it's so empowering. It is, because what we do know is that predators use very textbook. They're not that brilliant. I mean, it is over and over the same things, the same tactics, the same ploys, telling a child a certain thing, asking them to do a certain thing, and we get ahead of it. So we have children that the responses are, hey, wait a minute, my friend told me that happened to her last week. So it actually teaches them not only to understand what they're stepping into with more of a light bulb, but it prepares them to be advocates for each other. So even if it's a girl in middle school that she's telling her friend that she has a new boyfriend, it helps equip them now to say, wait, that's not a boyfriend. What is he having you do? And so it really is teaching them to get ahead of it, understand it, and shut down, because you know what? It's like the tactics of the enemy. It's the same thing over and over, not that creative. So we're empowering the school, the kids, the adults to get ahead of it.
It sounds like it has incredible potential. And I want to ask you also, why are you combining sex abuse and trafficking in one curriculum?
Right. Well, 92%, that's the stat. 92% of survivors of sex trafficking were childhood victims of sexual abuse. And in the decade plus that I've done the work, I think I've met one girl that said she couldn't remember a chunk of her childhood, but other than that, they all had said. It started with a youth pastor. It started with a coach. It started with a parent. They kept a secret. Their self-esteem eroded. There was shame. And then it leads to, typically the stats say a child will run away or get promiscuous. And within 48 hours, what we do know from sexual abuse, thinking whatever's out there is better than what happens in my bedroom, within 48 hours, 80% of any child, any zip code will be approached by a trafficker after running away. So we need to get ahead of it on the front end, because sexual abuse, whether in the church or in the school, is happening everywhere, every zip code. And that is the root of childhood sex trafficking in America.
So sobering, but so important. I know we're all rooting for this curriculum and anything that will help kids. Elizabeth Fisher-Good, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much for covering it.
Coming up, a homeless man saves a police officer from a burning car, but there's a twist to the story. Find out next.
Get the top political news and analysis from Washington on Faith Nation, tonight at 6 Eastern, only on the CBN News Channel.
We have an heroic story to share from Texas. A man who is homeless helped victims who were in a car accident. It happened after a sheriff's deputy who was chasing a robbery suspect got into an accident with another car, which trickled down to 5 other cars. The man says he heard some booming noises, looked and saw the cars, and sprung into action, helping as many people as possible. He then saw the officer's car on fire and says he jumped over the car and with assistance pulled the officer out of the vehicle. Sadly, a woman and 2 children died as a result of the accident, but the twist of the story is the homeless man is now reunited with his family after being seen on the news. The family thought he died in a stabbing weeks ago. Time now for your Monday motivation. I want to leave you with this thought as we begin yet another week together. Yesterday is gone and tomorrow is still many hours away. Today is here. It is the present. It is a gift from God and it is a new day. Expect God to do something new and don't tie his hand, looking for him to make today look like any other day you've already seen. With that word, I encourage you to make this a marvelous Monday and be sure to have yourself a wonderful week. That is going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. You can always find more of our programs on the CBN News Channel at any time. You can also find them online at cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can email us, newswatch@cbn.com. And you can reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We'll see you right back here, same time tomorrow.